Every empire believes it can police the world. Every empire believes it can project power endlessly. Every empire believes its military strength is infinite. And every empire in history has been destroyed not by defeat on the battlefield, but by the economic cost of maintaining global power. Military overextension is not dramatic at first. It starts slowly, quietly, invisibly. Armies are deployed a little farther. Bases are built a little larger. Wars last a little longer. At first, the empire feels stronger. Then suddenly it wakes up bankrupt, surrounded by enemies, weakened from within, and too exhausted to defend itself. This is the story of three superpowers that followed the same suicidal pattern. Spain in the 1500s, the Soviet Union in the 1900s, the United States today. Three eras, three ideologies, one identical mistake. The deadliest illusion of empires. Every empire starts with wealth, and wealth creates armies. Armies create victories. Victories create confidence, and confidence creates overconfidence. It is at this moment, when an empire feels invincible, that it begins signing commitments it can't afford. Protect this territory, deploy troops here, control that sea, defend that ally, intervene in that conflict, punish that rival, police that region. The empire grows militarily faster than it grows economically. This is the fatal imbalance that ends every superpower. Spain, the first global superpower to destroy itself. Spain in the 1500s was the richest empire on the planet. Massive fleets, gold flowing from the Americas, silver mines producing 400 tons a year, armies feared across Europe. Spain had everything a superpower dreams of. But gold created a deadly illusion that Spain could fight everyone, everywhere, forever. Spain's military commitments: war against France, war against the Ottoman Empire, war in the Netherlands, war in Italy, war in the Philippines, war in the Americas, war against England, constant naval warfare across the Atlantic. By the late 1500s, Spain had military obligations on 4 continents. The cost was catastrophic. Half of all Spanish revenue went to the military, and still it wasn't enough. Spain began borrowing from Italian and German bankers, then borrowing to repay old borrowing, then borrowing to pay interest on previous loans. The world's richest empire collapsed under its own weight. In 1557, Spain declared bankruptcy. Then again in 1560, 1575, 1596, 4 bankruptcies in 40 years. Spain didn't fall because it was conquered. Spain fell because it tried to control the world with an economy too small to support its ambitions. The Soviet Union, a superpower, built on sand after World War II, the USSR emerged as America's equal, at least on paper. It had nuclear weapons, millions of soldiers, and the largest tank force in the world. It controlled Eastern Europe. Its ideology spread globally, but behind the image of power was a fatal flaw. The Soviet Union spent like a superpower with the economy of a developing country. Soviet military burdens, occupying Eastern Europe, funding Cuba, Angola, Ethiopia, Vietnam, supporting communist revolutions worldwide, racing the US in nuclear weapons, maintaining millions of troops, keeping garrisons from Berlin to Mongolia, invading Afghanistan in 1979, spying, intelligence, propaganda, global operations. The Soviet military consumed 15–20% of GDP, 3 times more than the US. This level is not sustainable for any economy, but especially not for a stagnant, inefficient, state-planned one. By the 1980s, factories were outdated, farms couldn't feed the population, technology lagged behind, productivity collapsed, oil prices fell, and all the while Soviet tanks sat in Eastern Europe, draining billions. Then came the final blow, the war in Afghanistan, the Soviet Vietnam. It drained the economy, killed morale, and exposed the weaknesses of the Red Army. In 1991, the USSR collapsed, not because the US invaded, not because NATO attacked, but because the empire was too expensive to maintain. Once again, military overextension killed a superpower without a single foreign bullet. The United States, the new Spain, the new USSR. Now we arrive at the most dangerous part. Most Americans believe their military is invincible. They believe the United States is protected by oceans, rich in resources, supported by allies, and unmatched in technology. But what they ignore is the same fatal pattern that destroyed Spain and the USSR. The cost of empire is exceeding the economic capacity to sustain it. The US today maintains 750-plus military bases, troops in 150 countries, the most expensive navy in history, aircraft carriers patrolling every ocean, commitments to NATO, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, and dozens more, endless involvement in the Middle East, drone operations in Africa, intelligence networks across the globe, a $850 billion annual military budget, more than the next 10 countries combined. This is not defense. This is empire, and the empire is cracking. The signs of overextension, recruitment shortages, aging equipment, rising maintenance costs, ammunition shortages, struggling shipyards, trillion-dollar deficits, $35-plus trillion national debt, borrowing money to fund military operations, declining industrial capacity, dependence on foreign manufacturing for weapons components. The U.S. is following the Spain-USSR collapse pattern step by step. And the most dangerous truth of all, America no longer has the economic base to support a global empire. Manufacturing moved overseas, debt skyrocketed, infrastructure decayed, military needs expanded. This is how empires die, not suddenly, not through invasion, not through defeat. Empires die when the cost of their military outpaces the strength of their economy. The U.S. is now deeply in that phase. The breaking point of all empires. A superpower reaches its breaking point when it faces two things at the same time. One, a global challenge that requires massive military spending. A domestic economy that can no longer support that spending. Spain faced France and the Ottomans while its economy hollowed out. The USSR faced the US while oil prices collapsed. The United States now faces China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, cyber threats, global instability, while also facing soaring debt, inflation, a weakened dollar, manufacturing decline, political chaos, collapsing infrastructure, social division, shrinking middle class. This combination has destroyed every empire in history, and the US is not immune. Empires do not collapse because they are defeated. They collapse because they exhaust themselves. A body doesn't die when someone attacks it. It dies when its organs stop functioning. For empires, the economy is the heart, and military overextension is the disease that shuts the heart down from inside. The second half of this story shows how all three superpowers, Spain, the USSR, and the United States, followed the same fatal sequence from confidence to arrogance to collapse. When empires spend more on war than survival, there is a precise moment when an empire becomes doomed, when maintaining global power costs more than maintaining domestic stability. Spain hit this moment in the late 1500s. The USSR hit it in the 1980s. The US is approaching it now. Let's break down the pattern. Phase 1. Strength. The empire is rich and expanding. Phase 2. Overconfidence. Military victories convince leaders they can do anything. Phase 3. Overextension. The empire deploys everywhere, not because it must, but because it can. Phase 4. Financial strain. Debt rises, taxes increase, inflation begins. Phase 5. Domestic decay. Infrastructure collapses, industry shrinks, people grow angry. Phase 6. Military decline. Equipment ages, recruitment slows, costs explode. Phase 7. Collapse. The empire suddenly can't afford the world it built. It retreats or crashes. This sequence has never been reversed. Once an empire crosses Phase 4, the decline is irreversible. Spain, a superpower destroyed by its own glory. Spain didn't fall because of a single war. Spain fell because it tried to fight every war. The cost of global dominance was so extreme that even the silver of the New World, the largest inflow of precious metals in human history, could not pay the bills. The numbers were insane. The Spanish Armada consumed an entire year of revenue. The war in the Netherlands drained the treasury for 80 years. Maintaining troops in Italy cost more than Spain's entire tax income. Inflation exploded as silver flooded the economy. Loans from bankers carried interest rates that grew intolerable. Spain defaulted 4 times in 40 years. And here's the tragic irony. Spain's empire was biggest at the moment it was financially dead. From the outside, Spain looked invincible. Inside, Spain was a hollow empire filled with debt, inflation, and resentment. It took only 1 generation for Spain to go from world superpower to permanently weakened nation. Spain never recovered. It never returned to superpower status. Its decline was permanent. That is the price of military overextension. The Soviet Union, a superpower built on debt and decay. The USSR had nuclear weapons, tanks, satellites, and global influence, but all of it was built on a rotten economic foundation. The Soviet economy grew only through forced labor, resource extraction, military production, central planning, propaganda. It was an economy built for war, not life. Maintaining global influence required paying for Cuba's economy, subsidizing Eastern Europe, funding revolutionary movements, maintaining the world's largest army, fighting a decade-long war in Afghanistan, investing billions in the nuclear arms race, building fleets and bases across the world. But the Soviet Union had no Silicon Valley, no Wall Street, no competitive manufacturing, no consumer-driven economy. It had missiles, but it couldn't make enough basic goods to keep stores stocked. By the 1980s, the costs were impossible to hide. Oil prices collapsed. Grain had to be imported. Factories broke down. Technology stagnated. The ruble was worthless. People lost faith. The Soviet Union wasn't defeated. It imploded from military overspending. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, its military was still gigantic, but the economy beneath it had evaporated. This is how empires die, with armies still standing, but no money left to feed them. The United States, the final act of the pattern. And now we arrive at the third empire following the same script. The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. Not because it needs to, but because empire demands it. America's military obligations: NATO, East Asia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Middle East, Africa, South America, Eastern Europe, Western Pacific, cyber defense of the entire modern world, 750-plus overseas bases, nuclear triad, aircraft carriers in every ocean, intelligence operations on every continent. This is not defense. This is global empire. But here is the danger. The U.S. economy is not growing fast enough to sustain the empire. The numbers are terrifying. $34+ trillion national debt, $1 trillion yearly interest payments, borrowing to fund the military, recruitment shortages, aging ships and aircraft, dependence on China for manufacturing, rising cost of future wars, domestic division preventing reform, collapsing trust in government. And the United States is facing something Spain and the USSR never faced: simultaneous multi-front pressure, China, Russia, Iran, cyber warfare, internal polarization, and economic stagnation. The U.S. military is still powerful, but the empire under it is shaking. History says this is the final stage. The economic breakpoint, when empires can't pay their own bills. An empire collapses when the cost of being a superpower exceeds the revenue of the nation. Spain hit this point when military costs exceeded tax revenue. The USSR hit this point when oil prices dropped and subsidies became impossible. The United States borrows $1 trillion every 100 days, cannot balance a budget, funds half its spending with debt, prints money when political solutions fail, has a shrinking industrial base, faces rising interest rates, must replace aging military fleets, depends on rivals for critical components, cannot afford a major war, but must pretend it can. This is the exact same financial death trap Spain and the USSR entered right before their collapse. What comes next? The three possible endings for overextended empires. When a superpower overextends militarily, history offers only three endings. Ending 1. Economic collapse. Spain model. The empire defaults, currency collapses, military retreats, and the nation becomes a regional power permanently. Ending 2. Political implosion, USSR model. The empire breaks internally, regions split, political factions rise, and the global system dissolves overnight. Ending 3. Strategic retreat, British model. The empire withdraws intentionally, cutting commitments and shrinking influence to save the economy. The United States is now at the crossroads between these outcomes. None of them preserve global dominance. The final lesson of Spain: the USSR and the USA empires imagine they fall because of enemies. But history shows one universal truth. No empire in history has survived military overextension. Not a single one. The greatest threats to an empire are not outside its borders. They are inside its balance sheet. When an empire cannot afford its bases, its fleets, its allies, its wars, its global commitments, the collapse begins. Slow at first, then suddenly. Spain didn't believe it could collapse until it did. The USSR didn't believe it could collapse until it did. The United States doesn't believe it can collapse, but history has already written the ending. Empires fall not when they are weak, but when they try to be stronger than their economy allows. That is the real cost of military overextension.